Okay, welcome. Oh, wait, first I have to count down from 5 so the LCTV knows we're going. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Start off with fun. Okay, so welcome to the first public forum of the Littleton Charter Committee. There will be more. Why are we here? As some background, best practices is for communities to conduct formal reviews of their government structures every 8 to 10 years. It's been 17 years since Littleton has done one. Government structure includes things like, does a town have a town administrator or a town manager? What is the role of that person versus a select board? Which boards and committees should be elected versus appointed? And who is responsible for the annual budget? In addition to the time lapse since this was last done, Littleton obviously has grown a lot, changed a lot. I like to tell the people in my committee when I moved here in 1993, it was a one-stoplight town. Municipal services generally are just more complex. As you know, the world is more complex, HR is more complex, there's more rules and regulations, and so things are just more involved than they used to be. And that we also had in the town of Littleton, we also had a spell of 5 years where we went through, 3 years, 5 years where we went through 3 different permanent hires for the town administrator position. And there were a couple of interims in there besides that. There was also some flux going on in the town, which caused some other issues. So there's a lot of reasons to do this at this point. So this committee was convened to conduct a review of the town's current structure and bylaws and make recommendations for updates based on its findings, including reviewing what other towns have done and propose a town charter. So I'd like to introduce my team, the team, I should say, not my team, the team. So my name is Betsy Bowling, I'm the chair. Kevin Brogan, Kyle Buck, Charlotte Dolens, Tim Goddard, Joe Knox, Karen McCloskey. Come on, Karen, put it up there. Alan McRae and Rob Rounce. And there are likely people you recognize on this committee and some you don't. The mix of stalwarts and new blood was intentional, and I think very healthy for the work being done. We've been meeting twice a month since March. The meetings are all televised, recorded on LCTV, so you can watch them for your viewing pleasure. Binge watch, so. All right, now we're going to explain more about what a town charter is and what it isn't, how the committee has been working through the process of developing one, and hopefully have some good dialogue. This is very much still a work in progress, with a final recommendation not expected to be made to the select board until next year. With that, I'll hand it over to Charlotte.
All right, so we're going to talk through some charter committee updates and some observations and preliminary recommendations, for which I'll hand over to Joe. Next slide. But first of all, we're going to have a little quiz, just a little icebreaker, to see what we know about this subject. So next slide. Oh, okay, gave away the answer. Go back. Okay, could you go back one, Sophie? Let's see. Technical issues. Okay, well maybe I'll just read them off here, not to give it away for everybody. All right, so first question, who appointed the Charter Committee? Anybody know who appointed us?
Select board.
The Select Board, excellent. So the Select Board convened the Charter Committee to just assess how well our current structure is doing and to potentially make recommendations. Next slide. Okay. I see my animations are giving away the answer here. So this was a little bit of a trick question, true or false. Every Massachusetts town with a population of 15,000 has a town administrator, not a town manager. So if you hadn't seen this answer, anybody would have been a bit not sure about this? Or is this pretty obvious? So it's a bit of a trick question because as we learned, and as we'll talk a little bit more about, we learned through this process that actually the title itself, town manager, town administrator, does not really confer authority or change or any difference between those roles. It's really how you define their actual job description that matters, and the title isn't as relevant. But we did find out that many comparable towns like Harvard and Groton have adopted what they call a sort of strong town manager model. So it's interesting for us to hear as we go through this process what other towns have done, and also to dispel a few myths and kind of learn throughout the process as well about like, what are we actually talking about here? All right, let's see if this next one works. Next slide. Oh, now we're going backwards. Okay. So who's really in charge of hiring Littleton's department heads? Is it the select board? Is it the town administrator? Is it town meeting? Or it depends? It depends. It depends. So one of the things we've been working through as a charter committee is just defining which positions are appointed by whom and how, and adding a lot of clarity to that process as well. So, you know, seeing if that structure still makes sense, seeing if any recommendations would be needed. All right, I think this is my final question here in the quiz. Okay, I will just ask it. Which of these following rules would not be in a charter? When to hold town meeting, whether the town administrator appoints the fire chief, how long a select board term can last, or how tall your fence can be. Any ideas? Okay, yes, exactly. And again, that's just a little bit of a silly question, but just to point out that a charter is something that really defines the broad structure of a governance system. It is not the same as a bylaw. It doesn't get into the nitty-gritties of land use, etc. Policies and bylaws still exist in order to clarify those kinds of specifics. All right, so I'm probably talking to a very amenable audience who knows about this stuff, but these are some of the things that we've also been learning about in the Charter Committee. All right, next slide, please. Okay, as it's coming up, I'll just talk through this. So what is a town charter? It's essentially a local government's kind of constitution. Some people refer to it as an operating manual. And it establishes essentially a framework for how decisions are made in a town, how responsibilities are divided up, and how the residents engage with their town government. So it's this kind of overarching guiding document that helps to spell that out. So as many of you maybe already know, or maybe you don't know or are curious about, Littleton currently functions without a comprehensive charter. We rely on bylaws, on historical precedent, on memorandums of agreement, and the Charter Committee is essentially evaluating whether formalizing a charter would be a way to improve governance, accountability, and effectiveness for the town of Littleton. So, why does this matter? Well, we expect that a well-structured town government would actually enable us to ensure that services are delivered efficiently and effectively, that policies are implemented consistently, and that residents have a clear avenue for participation. And we know that over time, communities evolve, and what worked in the past may not be the best fit for the current and future challenges. So the committee's goal here is not to change for change's sake, but really to ask, are we governing in the best way for Littleton? And how is that going to look in the future as well, right? Not just for today, but going forward. So some of the key questions that we're reviewing include things like, does the current structure provide clear lines of authority, accountability, and decision-making? Are roles and responsibilities well defined for town officials and boards? Could changes improve transparency and public engagement? Are there inefficiencies or outdated processes that could theoretically be improved? Next slide. So again, as we go through this process, we've as Betsy said, you can binge watch all of our meetings. You can also delve into the minutes. And I think it's kind of interesting also to see how the questions that we've been posing as a committee and some of the discussions we've been having as we probe further into these issues. So as I think you'll hear when we go through, if you do take a look at the minutes or the meetings, we're not always talking about things that are broken. Yes, there are elements that we want to improve, but it's not always about that premise of like, well, something is broken, we have to fix it. It's also about making sure what actually works in Littleton continues to work as Littleton grows as well. And we know, I'm sure everyone is going to point out and has pointed out, there are areas of Littleton's governance that maybe have challenges. But we also know that Littleton's doing really well in several areas of governance. So you'll hear this kind of discursive theme about that a charter helps us to plan for the future, prepare for growth and complexity. We want to be thinking about what our town should look like going forward, and not only what it looks like today. We're working to define how the town government works clearly, consistently, and for the long run. And it's really hard sometimes to have these conversations in a vacuum. So, a lot of themes emerge from this process, and we really want to also try to grapple with those. One of the things that comes up is, would a strong manager to concentrate power? And we've been very, really trying to explore what that means and what a charter will and will not do. And we come back to this idea consistently around creating efficiency, accountability, and having clear checks and balances as well. So all those things kind of coming together. Next slide. So a little bit about the logistics. As Betsy mentioned, beginning in March, the Charter Committee has convened roughly once every 2 weeks. And we've been starting to review the common elements of a charter. So if you go into a sort of deep dive on charters, a lot of them have these common elements. They are legal documents, essentially. And so we've started with the legislative and the executive branches, and then also elected boards and committees. So between January and March, the Charter Committee was formed. We have a couple of consultants working with us, and I can explain a bit more about that in a minute. And we developed a work plan for how we're going to go through this process systematically. And then, like I said, we started with the legislative branch review. So that's where we really delved into town meeting and drafted some language around town meeting. And then the executive branch review. So that's where we talk about town manager, explore different models, town administrator, and we had a lot of discussions also with the select board. Then we dived into departments, boards, and committees, and that's kind of where we're at right now, with inputs from our police and fire chiefs, with the commissions, boards, department heads, etc., and bringing us to our first public forum today, where we hope to get some input from you all as well about this process. And just as a reminder, our committee here. Next slide. So going forward, the Charter Committee is going to continue on this journey to review Littleton's governance structure in the context of these common charter elements, with the aim ultimately of making recommendations and having a draft by late 2026. So that's both recommendations from the committee as well as potentially draft charter language. And so there's a lot in the middle here, and we've intentionally left specific dates off of this latter section. Our charge has been to do this well, to do it right, and to take the time needed. We do hope to get to the point of this executive review, legislative submission and approval by late 2026. And Betsy can talk a little bit more about that as we talk about next steps at the end here. But we still have quite a bit to do before we wrap up this process. We're nowhere near done just yet. All right, next slide. So the Charter Committee thus far is really focused on listening and learning. It has been a very steep learning curve, I think, for a lot of us, and we've really tried to then synthesize what we've been hearing from a lot of different sources across Littleton's government. We've already heard from officials, staff, boards, committee members. This is, I think, an exhaustive list of who we have spoken to so far. Apologies if I've missed anybody. And it's a lot of people. We've heard from a lot of perspectives. but it's also ongoing. We're really only in the middle of this. And so we expect to hear from additional individuals and groups in the coming weeks and months as well, as we go through those common elements of a charter. And thus we need to sort of bring in different people who can bring us that perspective as well. Next. So I mentioned consultants. We've been very fortunate that throughout this process, the Charter Committee has been guided by experts from the Collins Centre for Public Management, and they provide technical assistance on legal and procedural matters related to developing a charter. So the Collins Centre, and for us that's represented by two team members from there, Anthony and Mel, and you'll see them in some of our meetings, kind of live when we have our meetings, but they conduct and share relevant research with us. They provide guidance on the charter process. They explain a lot of the relevant state and local laws, and they help the committee to draft the actual charter language. As you can imagine, that actual charter language, it's legalese, it's quite sort of a little alien to the layperson, and they're able to tell us, well, this is the way it would be framed in a charter. This is your sort of layperson understanding of it, and this is how we would actually write it if it was in a charter. They also help us to understand our own bylaws and state laws and sort of see how that then relates to the kind of discussions that we're having. Some of the examples of research that they do for us, they had an analysis of our election competitiveness, so elections in Littleton, which was really interesting. They give us guidance on things like elected versus appointed positions. They provided us with primers on the structure of town meetings. What's popular, what's not? What is the majority of Massachusetts doing, for example? And sort of providing us with those comparable examples. They've also provided a primer on executive authority, including this concept of weak versus strong town manager, sort of helping us to grapple with some of these governance terminologies and concepts. And as I said, actually helping us to understand Littleton's existing bylaws and also relevant state laws. Next slide. All right, so this is where I'm going to hand it over to Jo, because after all of that process, we've ultimately come up with some initial observations and initial recommendations, or at least preliminary recommendations. And so the next couple of slides are over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I was happy to be on the last committee, Town Government Study Committee, that dates back 17 to 20 years. There was a group of us that met, there were 8. And at that time, we didn't have the luxury of having the Collins Center to guide us. So we gathered all this information over a whole year. And thank God we had a person on that committee that could all organize and put it back together. At that point, knowing Littleton the best that we could, there were 8 people on that committee, we did talk about doing a charter back then. But the idea that was given to us by the select board back then was that they wanted to have some changes made before that. So we didn't go with the town charter, we went with some different ideas. And it took us about a year and almost 18 months to go through the whole process. I want to give Betsy a lot of credit for being chair, because when you have 9 different people with 9 different ideas, during meetings sometimes you can go off in tangents. And when you go off in those tangents, you can't get back to the real subject you were talking about. But as you can see from this, I don't want to be able to read it too. The way to build clear, transparent, consistent framework for town government. I think one of the couple words there is transparent and consistent framework, because we don't have that right now. We have great committees that are working. We have some things that could be improved on, so we want to make sure that everyone knows what's going on. The town charter would serve as the town's operating manual. And in a sense, it's local constitution setting the framework that guides Littleton itself to decades to come, defines how decisions are made, who is accountable, and how the responsibilities are shared. And that's been an important subject that we've gone through. Many aspects of our current town government work well, but are heavily reliant on long-standing relationships that are formal and informal stand, and we find this all the time now. improvements we tried to be made over time with MOUs of understanding. And the problem with all those is that each one is different from each committee and it's not consistent. So we wanted to work on that type of thing. The charter makes sure future boards and employees have the same clarity, regardless of personalities or turnover. The town charter isn't about who occupies a specific position today. It's about making Littleton's government remain clear, transparent, and consistent for decades ahead. And once again, we want to make the point that there's some things that are working in town really well, and I wouldn't be surprised our committee won't change certain aspects of what's going on. But we want to make sure that things are improved as the town grows. We have to make some of these changes. Without doing that, we just want to make sure that the town government is consistent. If we go on to the next slide. Over the 7 months, there have been a few key principles that have emerged. We have formed preliminary recommendations, and these are really preliminary. I mean, I even had a phone call today from a committee member that wasn't able to meet part of the meeting, and we're open to have people come back at any time. And that person, I've talked to Betsy tonight, that person is going to come in first thing at our next meeting on the 27th, just because some things weren't relayed to us that they thought was very important. So the idea is that we're still looking at things and nothing is absolutely solid. General support for a strong town manager model, a single accountable executive responsible for the execution of daily operations, hiring, and the budget prepares. This is important because we even found out that 20 years ago, this was the problem, is that we didn't have that person that was in charge, someone that's at the top. We had what was called a very flat government, where everyone was on their own. And at certain times, I can tell you, being in real estate, I still remember 20 years ago, if not more than that, going into one of our offices at Town Hall, and God's honest truth, there was a sign there, I'm gone for the day. And we have to make sure that type of thing doesn't happen anymore. We want to make sure people are responsible and all the offices are operating, and somebody is in charge. Police and fire chiefs, this has been a great discussion. It's been decided, not decided, but these roles are appointed by the select board and managed by the town manager for day-to-day operations. We went through a great discussion on this and how should it be appointed. In the past, the select board has made those choices, and for good reason. We thought that with 5 different people going through different processes to bring that forward. But at the same time, I think it was one of the comments that was made by our current fire chief, Steele McCurdy, who was in Groton at the time, that he found some very strong points that report back to the town manager and not back to the select board for day-to-day operations. Personnel system, select board responsible for policy development, town manager in charge of ability and execution of town policies, and that can alter sometimes too. Sometimes it's the town manager that might be developing the policy that the select board looks at. But it's the select board, the highest ranking office in town, they're the ones that set the policies. Transparency is extremely important, and it's hard to get this across to people. Like, our meeting's been wide open, and it's great to see this many people here tonight. We had no idea there would be 5 people, or 20 or whatever, but we try to be transparent in everything we do. We decided to preserve open town meeting where every resident has a vote. We looked at the representative town meeting, and it's generally not favored. Some towns not too far from here have the representative town meeting where you actually elect a representative. You can't go to a town meeting and get your point across. We felt so far, unless someone comes to us to tell us different, that's the best way to have your local government run, giving everyone the opportunity to stand up and make their point at town meeting. Codify the spring and town meetings for predictability. That's just to make sure they're being held at a certain time. And formalize a deputy moderator position. That's being discussed and how that's going to happen. That's really preliminary. Consistency. Clarity reporting lines and reduce reliance on the MOUs that I was talking about between boards and administration. Town manager accountable to the select board with defined oversight departments. And once again, the MOUs that I was talking about, even 20 years ago, when we talked about changing town government, we didn't go with the town manager, but we tried to get the point across that department heads should be reporting to someone and not have that flat government. And MOUs, they're not that well received right now, but when they first started out, they actually had a purpose because it was a chance for certain boards to be able to speak out. You can change the slide. Key principles have emerged from the communications, and we have formed preliminary recommendations on the town charter. Checks and balances, extremely important. We had a discussion on this even at the last meeting. Maintain independent oversight with mandated. Schools and light and water remain outside the direct town manager supervision. Strengthen financial safeguards through independence, auditing, and accounting functions. Community voice, continue elected leadership that ensures public trust. And as I feel right now, for the most part, the boards are elected. Not all, we're still talking about this, but elected boards are probably the best way to go because it gives people a chance to talk, have their feelings, as opposed to just having one person making an appointment. Focus on roles that connect directly to residents' confidence and transparency and fairness. As these recommendations take shape, the committee will conduct additional research, continue to work through the Common Charter topics and draft charter language and support from the Collins Center. Recommendations will be shared with the Select Board for their consideration approval before submission to the town meeting. Once again, we're an advisory board set up by the Select Board. Our work here is advisory. We do our best. We think it's going to be best for the town, but that does go back to the Select Board, who can review it and actually knock things out if they wanted to, or make changes to it. And at that point, it has to go to town meeting to be approved. So that's where we stand in this section now, and I think I'm done in this. Thank you.
Next slide.
Okay, so this is where we just questions and answers, I guess. We got some. Go ahead. Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Next slide.
We get the party started here. What part of town government? So these are just some questions to put out there. Obviously, if you have questions you want to ask, you can just ask them. But this in case, because people kind of sit there, don't do it. So here's some questions you might want to ask, or get you thinking about questions you could ask. What part of town government do you find most confusing or hard to follow? How confident do you feel you understand how decisions get made in Littleton? And when you think about town government, what do you value most? Anything? Yes, Diane.
I know that the charge that you had was for 18 to 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
And at the last meeting, you said that you felt that you were behind because you thought that you would have it ready for this coming May. Is the intent, so that would only be a year that you would be deliberating. Is the intent still only to go a year, or are you still looking at the 18 to 24 months?
Expect it to be 18 to 24 months. When we worked with the Collins Center, they kind of had a timeline. They had to go 12 months. And so we were starting to work on that. But then as we worked through it, again, like Charlotte said, we have to do it right. And like one of the things was having all those boards and committees coming into, especially the appointed boards, or whether you elected a commit and or appointed boards and so on. We had all those people come in. It took a lot of time. We could have shortened that time frame by, instead of having them come into us, having individual members go out and talk to people and then come back in and tell it. We said that it wouldn't have worked. So we wouldn't have got the information we needed. So it's going to be longer than 12 months probably.
So it's saying town meeting 2026.
Probably fall. Probably. Again, we'll see. Yes.
Lizzie, I'm a little confused on how the schools integrate into this. You said in particular that the schools do not go through the town administrator or the town manager.
Right. They
Can
do
you
not.
describe what it is now and what you're proposing it would be?
Nothing will change with the schools. That's pretty much mandated by state law.
Okay, so can you outline very briefly how it currently runs? I mean, how
The
does
schools?
Yeah.
You want?
Desi from the state. So like the school committee oversees school councils. I'm a parent rep on the Shaker Lane School Council, and I know that that's overseen by school committee, which is something that's through the state. So the state education.
The superintendent of schools runs the schools. The superintendent of school runs the school, and he works with the school committee, and they run the day-to-day business of the school.
Okay, and how's the superintendent,
He's the boss of the school, he
I know.
runs everything.
who hires him?
The school committee,
Oh.
the school committee hires the
School committee
superintendent.
hires him.
Yes, and the school committee gets a budget, and it's a dollar budget, the town doesn't get to vote on line item by line item in the school budget, they get a certain dollar amount, and then the school committee and the superintendent, they decide how that money gets spent. So the schools are very, very different than the rest of the town.
And that budget is voted in at town meeting.
Is that okay? Is that what you wanted?
Oh,
It's
it's
clear as mud, I get
Asked what do you find hard to follow?
Yes, yeah, it is. You know, and it's interesting you say that because, and you read the charter and you start reading through, you know, everybody, a lot of the wording doesn't say that. You know, doesn't especially spell out that the schools are separate. The schools are separate. You don't want to put that in every paragraph. But one of the contentions is if you don't, someone who doesn't understand all this stuff and they read the charter and they think, I'm going to read this, I'm going to understand how our town works. And you still don't know because it doesn't say the schools, this doesn't apply to the schools, every line by line, basically. So it's a good question. It's understandably that that it's confusing. Yes, sir.
I guess just to follow up on her question, how does the school department and the town integrate if they're kind of managed separately? How does the town manager, administrator, the police and the fire work in that sense, like through memorandums of understanding, or would that be incorporated into a town charter?
I mean, there's different aspects, and again, I'm not going to be the expert on all these things, but the budget is one thing, so they just have to work together, obviously, and you know that comes together at town meeting and so on. The day-to-day operations, like the police with schools and so on, the town manager has, I don't know how often they have operations meetings, whether it's once a week or I don't know how often it happens, but all the department heads come together. So even if they don't report to the town manager, most of those people are coming to that, including the police and the fire, and there are representatives from the school, I assume, at some of that. So there's things like that that happen because you're all part of the same team. But it's not structurally, it's not organizationally, it doesn't work that way. Yeah.
The difference between a town manager and a town administrator, and how did they get to be that?
So it's interesting. It's really just a title, as we learned. We were all surprised by that. There is no state laws or state rules that say, or guidelines that say, if you're a manager, this is your job, and if you're an administrator, you only get to do this part, but you don't have this authority. It's not like that at all. It really is just a title. And then things like the charter or your town bylaws determine what the responsibilities and authorities that person has, whether they're a manager or an administrator. So it might help you if you say you're a town manager instead of an administrator, if you're hiring for that role. If you say you're a town manager, you may get a different level of candidates than if you say it's a town administrator. That's one reason why you might do it. Within the town itself, if you say I'm the town manager as opposed to the administrator, it might sound like you have more authority. But it really is just a title.
And they are hired by
The select board.
the select.
Select board. Yes?
I may have missed this, but when you showed the preliminary recommendations, and I assume those were drawn based on the more qualitative research of all those interviews the committee has conducted, was there like a more quantitative research, like a survey of town residents to inform that as well?
No, we have not done that.
Is that coming up?
That really wasn't part of the plan. I mean, we have something like this and this many people come out. I guess we haven't decided yet, this is the first public forum because we had so much learning ourselves and so much ramping up ourselves to do. So this is the first public forum to try to get feedback for what do people want? What should we be doing next? Go ahead, Charlie.
I guess I was going to add to that. I think it'd be interesting to know what you would want to input on, because some of these things are procedural between certain boards, committees, department heads. So it's sort of the operating procedures, like whether or not the Parks and Rec department reports to a town manager or the select board, for example. So as a member of Littleton, as a resident of Littleton, what aspects of the charter would you want to be surveyed on? Because some of them are also, it says this is the state law or whatever. So yeah, if you have some thoughts on that.
Personally, like the one thing that jumped out to me, and I would say that this is biased because I can share my opinion because I'm here. Somebody that isn't able to be here because maybe it's a 2-parent household and like my husband isn't here because he's got to be home with our daughter. People that don't like to drive at night aren't here, but I can share my opinion because I'm here. That's the issue that I have with the town meeting as well. And I don't know kind of like the legal restrictions on the governance of our town that mandate, as it said, an open town meeting versus representative. I know it said where every resident has a vote, which is great for transparency. To me, it counters one of the other principles, though, that was up there about do residents have clear avenues for participation? And I'm wondering, are there opportunities for us to be creative with that, to like preserve town meeting for open communication, but divorce it from actual voting? Like, is that an option? How do we meet those types of needs? So I guess that's what I would offer up in a survey.
I'm not entirely sure this will satisfy everything because that's a great question and a very big question. We did actually ask about remote voting for town meeting, and apparently that is prohibited currently under state law, so it's not actually an option to pursue, which I thought was an interesting nugget of information. The part more about like having that voice within our committee, I think the last slide here actually has our email address. But that is for any questions at any time to proactively share anything that you want. If you listen to one of the meetings and you have a question or what have you, but we can certainly take note of the survey as well.
Are there ways for us to make town meeting more accessible to people by, alternating a weeknight with a weekend day or something like that? Or like, is there flexibility in the timing of town meetings? Because I know when we're talking about the school building project vote coming up, a big problem that we encountered was how we were going to get families to the vote, especially, people that are caregivers and not just of young kids, but of older people, partners of older people that need help, things like that. That's been a big problem. And, when it comes to something as important as, our taxes and things like that, like, is this where we can discuss, making changes to how a town meeting is?
So one thing that I found interesting as well is just what a charter does and does not specify. So the charter would say something like, there will be a Springtown meeting. It will be in the first 10 days of May, or, it'll give these parameters, but then, the specifics are up for grabs.
So the other part of this charter, think of it kind of like the Constitution for the town, right? So to change it, because you can't get down to that level of detail, because then if you want to change it, you're back to this whole process again in town meeting, and it goes to the state legislature, somebody there has to approve it. So it is this line of structure and high level at the charter level, but when you get down to the processes and how you do things, it's not in the charter. That has to be the bylaws and the policies and so on. I'm sorry, Joe, do you have something else you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted to point out that a number of years ago, a town moderator can probably back this up, that we did go to a SADD meeting. And attendance wasn't that good at all because so many young families had kids in sports and things that the attendance was actually worse than it was on our nightly meetings. It's a tough discussion to try to get people out for those meetings. And there's been plenty of ideas and aspects, but nothing has come forth that functions as well as our open town meeting right now. And even our town clerk, who's in charge of all those town meetings, can probably back you up with that.
So I will tell you that we did have a Saturday. In the beginning, there was 150 people there. We decided to take a break. We offered people food for lunch, came back, and there was 35 people there for the rest of the meeting.
When we have a townwide vote where people are, dropping the forms in the box outside your office,
Yep.
What's the participation rate for that? Is that higher than a town meeting?
For voting, there is more people that vote for ballot voting, yes, typically.
So it seems like that,
For an election, so an election is totally different than town meeting, because it's typically either candidates that you're voting for, or,
does the charter specify, I know you said it declares like maybe the frequency of a town meeting, that type of thing. Can it address anything about what can be addressed in a town meeting versus a ballot vote, if that's the contrast?
I think other people talk to that, but it's probably more state law, right? Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Every community must have an annual town meeting between March and June. And they can have as many special town meetings, and we typically have one in the fall or at any time during the year. But there's really, currently, there's no option to eliminate the town meeting portion and just go with a ballot or I think that's sometimes called the Australian ballot. In New Hampshire, they do something like that where they do the budget in the spring and they do zoning in the fall. But
And I've gotten questions from other people just related to this, especially about the school thing now. And so you have to go to town meeting and then you also have to vote at the ballot. Why do you have to do both? But that's a state law thing also, correct?
correct,
For an override.
correct.
I just a follow-up on town meeting. With the town growing and becoming more populated, we've had several town meetings where, you know, whatever issue is being voted on has been very popular, so it becomes, there's too many people. And I know the middle school, they've tried the overflow room, but those people, I was in that room one time, we weren't able to voice what we wanted to say because of the gymnasium being full. Is that part of the Charters Committee to determine how are we going to accommodate an open town meeting with, you know, 700, 2,000 people, whatever, going forward? Where would that be held?
Detail that would not be in a charter.
Okay.
That's a detailed.
Right. The charter says there will be a meeting and then. Go ahead.
We are talking about a deputy town moderator that could help if we had to break up in multiple rooms, if we had a deputy who could either stand in for a sick moderator or could facilitate whatever, that could help in that regard.
Do you feel that the middle school venue is still an adequate size? Because there's nothing else. Will we have to go out of town for a town meeting if it becomes, I know you guys.
No, we're not the right ones. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. That's what I was kind of.
Discussion, everybody's
Like
interested
have an
in it, but-
idea
I
of
think
what.
our draft charter speaks to the fact that we could, in an emergency, conduct a town meeting in an adjacent town, if in an emergency.
Sure, okay.
So we can't go 10 miles down the road, but we could go to a facility and if needed, as a last resort, I think. Am I right? I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, a little flexibility there.
That'd be nice, huh? Brought music and do one up there. Yes.
How much of the charter does the state specify? What leeway do you actually have?
Just, it depends on what topic you're talking about.
There's a lot.
I would agree.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think has come up a few times in discussion is that a charter really does reset the rules for your town, but there are going to be some things that when it goes to state legislation, they're going to say, So you can theoretically put anything in your charter, whether you want to get it passed or not is another matter. So I think that's been an interesting balance. Like if you suggest X, you can suggest it in your charter, but it's probably going to come back to you from the state legislation, especially if it contradicts state law. So there's that, and that's where I think the Collins Center has been very helpful in guiding us as to like, would you want to fight that battle or not? And so there are some parameters around what's reasonable, but it does serve as then your legal foundation for the town.
You know, mass general laws impact a lot of things that we do, or a lot of things that we might want to do. For instance, with the fire chief, mass general law says the fire chief has the right to hire his own firefighters and nobody else says anything about it. No select board, he hires them. Mass general law says the police chief can't do that. So that's just two places where master laws govern what we say or propose on a charter.
Yes.
So you propose to have a strong manager. What is the difference? Why, first, number one, why do you feel you want as a charter, why do you feel we go that way?
Yep.
And how will that role change from what it is now to what you want?
Yeah. So again, the title is just a title, really.
Yep.
Okay. So it does mean when you go out to hire, you might probably get better candidates and so on, and Littleton's grown and so on, and so it makes sense from that standpoint. Some of what happens now, again, because we have some of the boards and committees hire their own directors. So like Park and Rec is hired by theirs and some of the other ones, right? So, but then we have this, but then the board, and this isn't a dig on any of the boards or I just pulled them out of the name. Because they all do a fabulous job, but most of them are part-time volunteers. And you've got a full-time employee here, and they need full-time management, or they need someone they can go to on a full-time basis when that issue comes up. So in Littleton, we issued these memorandums of understanding. So there is this dotted line or a solid line, depending on the memorandum, how it's written, so the town manager really has a day-to-day responsibility for them anyway. But again, everyone's different, and so now you've got this two-pronged of, depending on what's going on, well, this person's telling me to do this, and they're telling me to do this, and what am I supposed to do? And so that's not always ideal. So the idea is to maybe go more direct line, that the people report to it. We have a town manager, people report to them. The boards are still there, they're setting policy, they're still very important, they have a very crucial role to play, but not the day-to-day operation so much of the town. And that's really, the select board has done the same thing. They used to be very involved, if you've been in town a while, they used to be very hands-on in town, right? And as things have evolved, there were issues with that, some things didn't work as well. And so now they've taken back and said, look, we're supposed to be the policy-making board. And the town administrator, the town manager should be running the day-to-day. We should not be in there so that they're not getting 3 different people telling them what to do, because that's not fair to the employees, and it's not efficient for the town.
So they can hire and also let go if need be.
Who's this? The town? Yeah, the town manager, town administrator. Yes, that will all be defined in there. How that works, and probably we've had this discussion that the letting go is probably more difficult than the hiring, right?
Yep.
Right, and so we actually haven't addressed that yet.
Yep.
But it is, yeah.
The flip side of that is, how do you make sure a town manager or administrator doesn't have too much power?
Yeah, absolutely. And we all feel the same way, right? Especially what's going on now in the world, right? So we get it. On the other hand, you have to have checks and balances in, and you gotta figure out what's the right balance here. Because of what I just, on the other side of it, right? So, but you're asking, I mean, we all feel that, yes.
But how do you keep the transparency? I mean, transparency is, such a watchword in Littleton. You talked about it earlier. If you have someone, in their office making all of these decisions, if you're appointing board members, how do you make sure that filters down? Because it seems to me like you're gonna lose some of that transparency. I know at the beginning, someone talked about, we have all these silos in Littleton, but it sounds like you're gonna make one big silo. And so how do we prevent that from not happening?
In my opinion, part of it, you have to figure out the wording in here, but when I think of somebody being appointed, I don't think of one person back in an office, looking at resumes and saying, okay, you're on. Whether they're appointed for an employee job or on a board. That is still a process. If I were in industry, and I'm hiring somebody, I don't just hire like this. I bring the people in that know and what do we need to be hiring and what are the skills that we need. You bring all those people together.
But you wouldn't have to.
But that's what we do.
You wouldn't have to do that if you were the person who was making that.
Well, okay, but there's another part of this. Well, that's not necessarily true, because that part-time volunteer board may not know about hiring. They may not know about all the rules. You have to get HR involved. You've got a process. You also have a different hiring situation today, where a lot of times candidates are picked up quickly. So if you don't respond quickly, you lose good candidates. And again, you've got somebody who's full-time running a process, who does it every time. Every employee goes through the same process. It's the same way. This is how we do things. And you can follow it through. Yeah, go ahead.
I think one point, the town charter could actually say to the town that the town manager appoints everybody. That you could go to that extreme. But through some of the advice that we've had so far, there's different types of ways of hiring a head of the department too. You could have a town manager just make the appointment. Or you could have a small committee, which would involve the town manager. It could involve people from that committee or 2 people from that committee. So you get the consensus of other people. So it all matters. This is things that we have to go through. If we choose to do that, I know we're not going to say, let the town manager appoint everything in town. But the process, it can change. It can be, like I said, a small committee that reviews everything.
I was gonna say, is there a term to how long a town manager can serve or working for the town?
That's defined in the charter, I believe, how long you hire somebody for and so on. And we know about getting rid of town managers. We've done it a lot lately. It's a painful process and you don't want to do it a lot, but it can be done. Yes.
Just maybe adding a little bit to that comment as well. Some of the things that can be, and I think in our current tentative drafts, we've put in language like must follow personnel policies of the town, must comply with HR regulations, etc. So in that sense, the charter can stipulate that the town manager or town administrator isn't allowed to just go off and create their own hiring process or their own appointment process, that they would be mandated to follow the personnel policies of the town. And you can even insert language that says with input from whoever you feel like is appropriate to have input from, like the boards and committees. And then at the end of the day, you still do have the select board who has the authority over the town manager. And then there are a few other positions as well, like town council, the auditing and legal counsel, town council and town clerk, that also serve as these kind of additional independent checks and authorities as well.
Yep.
Is that going to be specified in the charter that they must? So are you going to define who has veto power? And make it very clear that they have veto? Town manager can propose that that they want to hire someone, and the select boards have, and whomever else we think should be.
So at that level, you'd be saying, yeah, you would say there's veto power, and you'll say so-and-so appoints, and maybe they have to do it with somebody else. What it won't get down to is the detail process, because again, that's going to change, and you're not going to define that at the charter. But you can say has to follow personnel procedures, it has to do that, but it's not going to be what is the personnel procedure.
But who makes the personnel procedure?
So one example would be, as outlined, you could say that a board would go through that search process. They would identify the 2 candidates, let's say, that they wanted to recommend. They would recommend them, and the town manager has the authority to ultimately make that final decision between the 2 candidates. For example, right? That's how some town charters have set it up. So that could be one way to do it, where you say the town manager could not hire or appoint somebody who has not been endorsed by the relevant board. There's all different ways in which you could set it up. One of the downsides that we heard about some towns have the town manager appoints, and then the select board gets like a 14-day veto window. And some people we heard from said that can be very challenging then to be competitive in hiring, because if you know that you've gotten a job offer and you know that you're sort of still on the chopping block for 2 weeks, that people have told us like we lose candidates. So it's, I think, an efficiencies versus authority balance, and it's still one that we're grappling with, like how do you write that appropriately in the charter? Yeah.
My other question, as it relates to that, is how do you know you have the right people on the board who have the legal background, the ability to select who's the
which board?
Right person?
Which board?
Any board.
Yeah, exactly.
Any board. So it might need to be specified into the finance, the director of finance, or the legal counsel, something, people that have expertise. Because a board can be just whomever, the town either elects, and usually you don't have much depth into that, frankly.
That's one of the discussions for some of the boards. As we look at some of the boards and whether they're elected or appointed, some of the ones that are elected now, one of the things, the suggestions that the consultants make is that, number one, is it usually are they often a contested election or not? A lot of our elections are very rarely contested. So if in effect what's really happening is you're going out and somebody's leaving, so you go out and you find somebody else and you get them to run, well, they're basically being appointed anyway, but you're going through the process. Where was I going with this?
Checklist.
The guidelines. Oh, and the checklist. So that's one of the issues is that, and the other one is if you're putting someone on a board and they need a certain set of skills, right? It's not just a good meaning volunteer who wants to serve on this, but you really need someone who knows a specific area. If you're on the Board of Assessors, was an example that came up. You really need some specific kind of skills to do that. Then those kind of things lead you more towards, well, maybe they should be appointed rather than elected.
Exactly, so that's
Yes.
my concern, is you point back to a board, the board could be just doesn't have the ability to make that decision. So yeah, the appointment might be a better way, or we have to think through a better way.
And you think through each one by one, we're going through one by one to say, but there's other ones, like if you're Park and Rec, well, that's very community-based, right? People feel like they're in touch with that, our kids and our families and so on, we know these people and they're involved, and so we want to elect those people, right? That's the kind of conversations we've had and that we're working through.
So are you talking about possibly, really putting down criteria for what type of talent you need on boards?
No, the charter will not say that.
Your charter
will not say that. The charter will say it's an elected board, it's an appointed board. And then it would be up to the people that are doing the appointing and electing to decide that.
But there's a difficulty because if you come in and have the veto a board that's really not technical or, qualified in that particular area of expertise, it could actually go the wrong way.
And then, again, at some point, you've got to hope that people are, assume really that you've got good people that are making right decisions. And if clearly things are off rail someplace, then that has to be dealt with. But in most cases, this is working for the most part now, right? I mean, for the most part, we're working. No? Not so much?
To your point though, Emily, I feel like that is a little bit what we're trying to grapple with. That as a board of very well-meaning and sometimes well-trained, we've learned that a lot of people actually then have to go through compulsory training to be on the board once they are elected to the board. So that's a variable training and expertise. Should those individuals be solely responsible for not only searching and finding the head of a department, a full-time employee of the town? Do they have the time for it? Do they have the knowledge of following all of the requisite HR policies and recruitment policies? Do they have the ability to sort of understand how that person should be contracted? I mean, there's a whole lot that we're asking. Instead of saying there should be potentially a COO type person who can manage that and have the authority, but still, as in a company would say, well, what do you think, right? Like, you're going to have to work with this person. What is your input? And so on. So I think it's that striking that balance that is sort of at the crux of that question.
Didn't we, now that we have an HR department, doesn't that, for instance, the cemetery commission, we hired the superintendent and assistant superintendent. We worked with HR, so we have all that expertise of, how you sign someone up, how you get the benefits and all that. But we decided who we wanted because we know the cemetery, we know what we wanted. We didn't need to go up to, if we had 2 candidates, well, we had 3 candidates. So we'd say, if we probably would offer one person up to town manager. So now you have another level of something involved. So it almost seems like you're complicating the hierarchy.
Well, maybe, but then again, there's a consistency part of it too. So you're doing it, and you're doing the right thing, you're doing all the right stuff, and you got the right candidate, and you're working with HR, but just in terms of driving the process, so we know it's the same across all the departments, right? And the time you found this person, and then who's going to make the offer, and how does all that happen? And maybe you have the time and you're into it and you're following through, but maybe somebody else, okay, I'm gonna get back to it, but I got the stuff I gotta do at work today, and I'll get to it tomorrow, and then it doesn't happen.
But how many commissions do you have that hire department heads? There's only, no, but how many are there? There's only a few, right?
A lot.
Boards and commissions?
A lot.
Like which ones are there?
Board of Health, Conservation, Library, Park and Rec, Assessors, Planning, Those are off the top of my head. I mean, there's a lot. And not everyone's the same. Like you said, you interviewed the cemetery commissioner and the assistant, right? Other boards might hire the director, but no one under them, right? Others might hire everyone in the staff, right? It's completely random.
All over the map. That's not scalable. That is not scalable.
It's also then, as a cemetery commissioner, are you involved in salary negotiations, or is that something HR is doing? And it's.
Well, Littleton scales, by the way. So that, yeah, so that you can, so I think we had the words consistency and clarity and effectiveness. So consistency, I think, is scalable. Lack of consistency is probably not scalable. And not a good thing from a legal standpoint, probably either. It probably introduces risk into the formula by not following standardized procedures across town departments and maybe even across town boards and committees.
But if you're doing the same thing, except you have one person doing the final.
Depends. We could have our charter say that department heads are selected by the town manager but approved by the select board. Department heads recommend their appointments to the town manager. That could be one construct. You could have department heads reporting to the town manager. That person could engage in a hiring process and involve all the right people, hopefully. A smart thing to do to get buy-in on the new person as they come in, not to do it in a closet, but to do it in an inclusive manner. I hope that would be the culture of the town, to be inclusive. You could, though, say, if you had that department heads had to go to the select board, either for veto, the ability to be vetoed, or for outright approval amongst multiple candidates, perhaps.
And then can I just add that for all these things where they say, and then you have to go to the select board, that's also a transparency check, right? Everything that the select board, all those decisions are made in open meeting publicly.
Okay.
Anything else? I have one more.
Okay.
We did the hiring.
Yep.
He's in charge of everything in the building. What happens when, or he, I say he, but
I could be a she.
What happens if there's like a dispute between, maybe there's a personality clash?
Mm-hmm.
And so is there an HR that maybe an employee has that they can go to for that?
Yeah.
I hope to high heavens that there's an employee handbook that addresses disputes and complaints and harassment.
With a strong person.
Yeah.
I sure as hell hope that there's somewhere a handbook that says that if an employee has a complaint about harassment, hostile work environment, discrimination, they can have a beeline here and A, B, and C will happen.
Even if it's with the top guy.
Absolutely.
It should be in place
and
now.
if it involves the top guy, I hope some other people get clued in pretty quickly as well.
Yeah.
But we can't do this to manage out bad things. I don't think. You can't manage out bad intent and bad behavior. You got to do the right thing, in my opinion, and then you got to have the right people sitting around and checks and balances.
There's always the concern I hear from everybody. If you've got a strong town manager, what happens if he does this and he does that? Well, what happens is the Board of Selectmen are his boss. And we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, the board has no problem dealing with a town administrator or manager who's not doing what he should be doing. And that's the answer. It's not because they're the boss, I'm powerful. The answer is the Board of Selectmen, and they can take whatever action is necessary when it's necessary. So it's not a power building thing. It's, I have a line of responsibility. If I were town manager, I certainly would want the department heads to report to me. I would certainly want to appoint department heads, pick the one of the two, because they work for me and I look for this. I'm responsible if the department head screws everything up. He did it, but it comes back to the town manager. You take the fall. So I want to be sure that I have some input into who works for me and how well they're doing their job.
What about non-personnel? What about non-personnel authority? I mean, what about decisions on, I don't know, 550 King Street or building a senior center? How do you see the town manager's authority changing from what we have now?
Everyone's got,
Well,
sure.
it still comes down to the select board versus the town manager, and you can sign contracts and things like that, right? And you're really talking about effectively?
I guess so. I'm not really sure what I'm.
Yeah, we still
versus operations.
Yeah, I think it was still pretty clear from the guidance we got that it was still policy setting. So that they would still be setting that direction or vision for the department and kind of contributing to the policy of what is happening, And that was something, again, to call them Parks and Rec again, but they were saying, that's one of the important features of their board is that they set that sort of vision for how they want the department ultimately, what offerings, etc. And then, of course, you do have other mandates in terms of who makes those authoritative decisions, and then you have the checks and balances also of the budget, right? Because you can't make a decision that doesn't have a budget attached to it. That's a whole other process. So even with consolidating some of the sort of operational day-to-day, just inherently there are still a lot of checks on that.
We had the Mark Haddad, who some of you know, he was at Littleton a long time ago, and now he's town manager in Groton. And he's the first town manager they had. They'd gone through this process as their town administrator was retiring. So they went through the process saying this would be a good, clean time to do this and go to a town manager. And one of the things we asked him was, well, okay, so now so he's talking about, because he's real excited. He loves it. If you know him, he's real into it and so on. And he's talking about he does this and he does that. And his process has sounded very inclusive in terms of hiring and all that. He says, so what happens though? The select board sets policy. So they say, you want to do this, and they say, no, do this. What happens? And you kind of said, well, ultimately, they're the boss. You have to do what they say.
Can I ask a follow-up question from the earlier question, town meeting, open town meeting versus representative? You guys felt that open town meeting is still the better way to go. I know there's another town, it was at Framingham or Pittsburgh. Framingham has just switched to city versus town, which I know is a different, situation, but why do we feel that representative would not work in this situation? And what's that threshold? Have you found that in any of your studies?
We did talk about that early on. We could go to representative town meeting. I mean, basically that means you have elected people who go to town meeting for you. And I guess the one thing is that nobody has switched to representative town meetings since 1979 in the state. Okay, so there's not even somebody who can say, why did you do this and how come? So there's not a lot of saying, okay, this is a good thing to do. Most people are not doing it. There were some personal anecdotes people, from the board had, or the committee, have lived in towns or knew people who were in representative town meeting, and the feedback is not real good, honestly. That's how far we got with it. So, and we really felt like, and I'll get to you, in Littleton, everybody thinks that town meeting attendance should be higher and so on. But really, I always feel like, people that are into it really embrace town meeting, and to take that away would be not well received. But did you have some particular point on that, or
just so obviously, talking about open versus representative town meeting, did you also look at potentially other forms of government? Because I know there are other ones, and League of Women Voters, for example, has a lot of good information about that. With Littleton, the way it's growing, the population, everything, and this is supposed to be a forward-looking plan, right? Not what we have now, but where are we going to be in the next, what, you said 7 to 8 years, potentially for a review? Again, per the state plan, but it was 17 years, you said, from the last one. So realistically, have there been discussions about maybe some other form of government?
I mean, we talked about it briefly, but I mean, go ahead. Somebody else want to talk? Go ahead.
The
feeling was
And
the-
there's a town or a city, and you can't be a city until your population is exorbitant.
Yeah.
And so that leaves us two options, town meeting, open town meeting, or representative.
I believe, I forget what the exact thresholds are, but there are some thresholds that are hard and there are some which are just recommendations from the state. I don't know if we have somebody who's still here from the state to talk about that, but my understanding is that Littleton could actually at this point look into some other forms of government. If not now, in the very near future, given our population growth.
What are the other forms specifically?
So for example, there are various forms of, you don't necessarily have to become a city, but you can have, you're talking about counselors and things like that for cities.
Right.
But I believe there are some other modifications with representative town government too. You could still potentially have somebody be able to allow residents to still come up and speak, but still have the actual representation for the votes and things like that through. So there are modifications to that.
There are. We basically looked at it
It's
for
quite
a little
rough.
bit and we decided just to stick with what we had for right now, but.
You can speak, but you can't vote.
Right, exactly, yep. And then again, what about, going to, I'm not necessarily saying a full-blown city, but something in between, because I know there are variations on that. Has that been just discussed as far as, again, the population growth we're looking at for the next 15 years?
Yeah, no, we didn't go,
Yeah.
we're looking at what we could implement now, and that was not one of them, so we didn't even talk about the city one very much, honestly.
Gotcha.
There is a very good, you mentioned the Acton Women's League of Coaches, if I'm getting that right. They did share a really great webinar on open versus representative town meeting, which
Yep.
was extremely informative.
That was earlier this year, and then they also had one on remote voting, which I know somebody has said that that's still illegal in Massachusetts, but I thought there were some towns that were working on some trials, so I was curious if you know anything more about that.
It's legal for representative
Yeah, for
town meeting
representative.
communities to
Okay.
promote participation. And it's probably just a matter of time before that is extended to open town meetings, but.
Karen, yes,
I was curious if you looked at all into whether Littleton should establish a quorum for open town meeting.
We did. We talked about it, but given what other towns had in place and the numbers that we could get consistently, we decided not to do that.
We actually, I think, had a pretty high attendance on average compared to other towns, which came as maybe a bit of a surprise.
It appears very low, but compared to other towns, it's
Yeah.
reasonable.
Percentage-wise of the population, actually, it's high.
You know, this is good. I didn't expect to get this much. This is great. And it's very important for us to hear what the concerns and issues are. That's good.
I guess in the interest of getting that more quantitative research and input on like different styles of town meeting. I know when you showed the timeline, it looked like by next spring, that would be the next public forum. And then sometime after that, would it be voting on the different recommendations, the opportunity to vote on representative versus open versus another structure?
No, the way this is going is, we're gonna make a recommendation, the committee is gonna make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, this is what the charter should be. So it's not everybody gets to vote on every line item. I'm glad at town meeting, ultimately, you get to vote on the final product. But it would be hard on these individual items. We go in and we're working with these consultants, we talk to all the boards, we're having all these discussions ourselves. I can't put out a flyer and say, here, how would you like to vote? Because you didn't get all that other information. This is always it's the quandary of town meeting, right? People don't want to come and sit through it, but on the other hand, you're voting, but on what information? You need to get the information, so that's it.
That's the nature of democracy, though.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, some people choose to be more informed. Some people maybe make the choice explicitly or implicitly to be less informed. But I think to hear you say people that are really into this, that are really into town governance and government, choose to show up.
No, I don't think I said that. But
A couple minutes ago you said that, and I have to say, I've only lived in Littleton 10 years, but I mean, I've been voting since I was 18 in every election.
Yeah.
And I try to attend town meeting as much as I can.
Right.
My husband tries to too, and sometimes we have to make the call.
Yeah.
sometimes we were making the call that, hey, our daughter's 4 years old, it's gonna go till 11, tonight's the night we deal with bringing her and saying, you gotta sit here, kid, it's important.
I understand.
And it's disenfranchising, though, to people that maybe can't afford a babysitter, don't choose to afford a babysitter that night, or people that don't drive at night, or people that, I don't know, have agoraphobia and don't want to be surrounded by that many people to discuss and vote. And I think if we're looking at not just what has worked in the past, but what can work in the future, knowing that we have to deal with the reality and the constraints that, like, the Massachusetts legislature imposes for a town of our size and structure needs a town meeting. Maybe we do need to be more creative to say we compromise by having representative town meeting, or exploring a model where not everybody can discuss, but maybe the voting can be remote or something like that. I think that's what you're saying. I wouldn't rule out those other options, especially when we're trading off on participation and transparency and making it equitable to the greatest number of people.
Go ahead.
So you mean something like people could like watch it, watch the town meeting, and then the votes could occur later, like people could vote online somehow?
Yeah, either that kind of model, because there are secure ways to do that now, or maybe it's that if you want to be at the mic and talking, you got to be there. But if you're like, I'm just going to take this in, I already know how I feel maybe, or I want to hear what other people have to say, but I still want to be able to vote. Maybe you vote remotely, or maybe the discussion happens on one particular day, but then you can drop your vote off at town hall anytime over, you know, the next 24 hours, or mail it in if you're going to be away. Like, we've evolved that in other ways to enfranchise more people.
Does any town do that sort of thing?
I think we're bound by Massachusetts state law.
I'm gonna say, we've heard this come up quite a few times, and I think the best thing to do would be to have that advocacy at state level. I don't actually personally know what that mechanism would be, but it seems like it is important enough of an issue, and I think Tim, you were saying it's probably a matter of time before that is permitted, but it is not something that towns are doing. Yeah. Town by town, for open town meeting. And then if you had representative, it would be one individual per, what is it? Precinct. And then that was one of the conversations as well. Would residents feel comfortable having that one individual, you know, representing them? And then they don't even get to vote. So it's sort of, you know, I hear you, I have two very young children and have had many of the same challenges getting to town meeting. But the general sense was that a representative town meeting may actually feel more disenfranchising, because then you have somebody who's going ahead and voting, maybe representing what you want, maybe not.
We have that at every other level of government.
Yeah.
I think the open town meeting is great. I mean, but I understand, I mean, I myself have trouble driving at night, and I don't have young children, but I totally get it. And I bet you in 5 years or so, this is what people are gonna be doing. And I think it has to be changed at the state level. So I think if maybe people need to be advocating on that level, rather than, you know, what, do anything about it probably, but.
Isn't there a regional transit authority that can pick people up?
We do have it for this town meeting. So there is transportation for this town meeting. So if you just have to sign up for it, they'll come to your home, pick you up and bring you back.
Publicity issue.
There's also
What's that?
babysitting, I believe.
Then that needs to be.
It has been on.
Childcare too.
On
And childcare this time around, yeah, it's on childcare.
channels, it's been advertised.
Town newspaper.
They have a town newspaper.
If I may, one last point on open versus representative. I know you stated that in your research, no one has changed since 1979. Not saying Littleton has to be progressive and be the leader, but we have been in other situations like the town sewer plant, et cetera. So maybe we take that leap. Maybe we study, are we a good enough model to be that jumping off point? That's all.
Has anyone spoken to Jamie Eldridge about
taking on that leadership role at the State House to make changes, so we can be kind of taking a lead and being sort of entrepreneurial.
Somebody may have it. For our committee, what we're focused on, we have not.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think that, not to like reiterate everyone's point, I mean, like AI is just going to be changing everything, the way we do everything, pretty quickly. And I think we should kind of like position ourselves for that instead of like position ourselves to be kind of like the dinosaur, but like really just get in front of that because it's here and it's gonna swallow us. And people are gonna have expectations. And I think people really already feel like extremely disenfranchised at the local and especially at the national level, but what's happening. And I think anything that you do to make people less connected will go very badly for people. Yeah.
Anything else? Okay.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for your comments, for your openness. Appreciate that very much. So we meet just the end twice a month. It's all, if they're on television and you're welcome to come. But again, we have an agenda, so we're going according to that agenda. And there is an email, it's up there
You know
someplace.
the last slide, Sophie?
Yeah, the last slide. It's Littleton, no, it's not. It's
Charter committee questions.
Charter Committee Questions at littletonma.org. One more. Oh. Keep going. There we go. There it is. It's right at the bottom there. Charter Committee Questions. So I was talking to some people over here. So even when people come and talk to us, the thing I said, this is the end point we're trying to justify getting there. We really are trying to learn and understand and make recommendations. So, you know, if somebody comes and talks to us, I always say, you know, if you leave and you think, oh, I meant to say this, or I wish I told them that, well, then come and tell us. Because we want to hear it now. We don't want to have something done and then say, oh, if we'd known that, we would have done something different. We'd rather know it now. But it has to be things related to the charter. We can't fix the state laws on open meeting law.
And just like, I know I got here, so it's like super late, apparently at the end, but yeah. So are you gonna take the feedback and kind of create guiding principles for how you ultimately make the decision? Like, this is what we heard from people in the public. These are like the guidelines that we'd like you to follow to get to the end decision, right?
It's just, it's one input that we get from all these different avenues we're getting input. This is one input that we have.
Will you
So
like
we bring them all
boil it
together.
down to like a few sort of like pillars that you'll use to guide?
Well, in some cases, it depends. Again, there's a lot of different aspects of this charter. But for example, this elected versus appointed, you know, we have some things you look at. Are they contested elections? Is this something that somebody needs to have some knowledge to take that role? You know, there's some of them, there's things like that. Some of it, it's.
And the Collins Center provides us with great information along the way. Here's a little white paper about representative versus open town meetings, an analysis of who's doing it, what are the advantages and disadvantages of each approach in this table. So Collins Center has been an incredible resource in terms of best practice.
What other towns are doing.
What other towns are
similar
doing.
to us. They find towns were similar to us and what they're doing and so on. Yeah.
And I think to that point about sort of guiding principles, I mean, we're also 9 residents of Littleton, as Betsy said at the beginning, right? We come in with our own feelings about this stuff, right? Our own perspectives. And I think that's where some of those words already sort of emerged, like a little bit of a word cloud, right? Clarity, transparency, trust, effectiveness, and these I think have been echoed today, but I don't know if we're necessarily saying we're sort of formalizing those as guiding principles, but it really has been interesting to hear from people across this process about what are the kind of instinctual feelings about this, what leaves you with like a bad taste in your mouth, like what kind of makes you feel, ooh, I'm not sure about that, and being responsive to that and not just doing this process on a sort of like we're just looking at our pieces of paper and making arbitrary decisions, but yeah, thinking about how it feels to then have those changes in this town, not just any town, right? So I take your point, and I think that's something that's sort of implicit a little bit in the way that we've been working as well.
The other thing is that not everything's going to change. You know, a lot of this is just putting it all in one document, because today, if you want to know all these things, who reports to who and how does the town work, you got to go through different bylaws, you can look through different town meeting votes. There's not one document that says this is how we are. And so even if we didn't change anything, just putting the charter together is going to be helpful for people to have it in one place. And then, but as you're doing that, and you say, look at this, well, okay, this is the time. You know, if we're going to review it, let's do it. So that it's not change for the sake of change or anything like that. It really is trying to look at it and say, you know, are there some of these things that maybe we could do better and different given that times change and some things are different. But, okay?
Well, yeah, one last comment.
Okay, one last.
So you said earlier, amending the charter is the whole big thing. You have to go to the state to get it amended. Is that what you said?
You do have, it is it won't be as big of a process because we'll have the document then. So now if there's one, like Groton said, there's one thing they got wrong. I don't remember what it was, to tell you the truth. There was something in the end, they came in through something happened like, oh, I don't even remember what it was. So they went through that, so they had to pass up a town meeting and so on, but it's not the whole big process like a 2-year process here because you've already got the document. You just know, okay, this thing we want to change.
Right, so I'm hoping there is a process to amend it.
Yes, absolutely.
Probably, the whole town will think, oh, yes, we should change this or that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, absolutely.
Is the plan to go to the 7 to 8 year review period that the state recommends for doing this again, or in a summary fashion, right? I'm assuming not because we don't even know.
It's long by then, yeah. But it should be. Obviously, things change and change fast, and as it was mentioned here, they're gonna probably be changing faster, right? The world's changing, so it's definitely a good idea.
Right, but that's the goal is to get onto that schedule as opposed to waiting another 17 years.
Right, exactly. And again, a little bit easier once you have a charter, now you've got it in one place, so it's easy to review it and say, what do we need to update, what do we need to keep the same? What's that look for, Mark? Does that look to me for
I was gonna
something?
say, Joe's probably anxious to do this a third time.
20 years, Joe, what do you think? It has been great, by the way, the committee, I think I mentioned it before, but having people that have been around for a while and really know things and people who have not, so they're asking the questions, well, how come you guys care about this? Why should I even care about that? And so it's been good. I mean, it's been painful sometimes, but good for all of us, I think, to go through it. But just know that it's not just a few people that have been around forever in a room who know all this stuff and that like it a certain way. It's not how it's going. It's a lot of different aspects of the town that are they're represented based on the discussions here. And as you have other ideas, reach out to any of us anytime. You don't have to come to the meeting and get on TV if you don't want to do that. Just contact people and let us know what you're thinking or send us an email. We really do want to hear it now. Trying to do the right thing. All it is. Okay? Anything else?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.